March is over, and you know what that means? It's time to unpack the drama on everything we read this month.
From books that had us obsessed to ones that just existed, we're breaking down all the highs, the surprises, and the stories that stuck with us.
Whether it was a five-star fave or a plot twist that had us side-eyeing the author, we've got thoughts, and we're sharing them all.
So grab your beverage of choice and let's get into this month's book recap.
So this month I was really proud of myself with 6.
That's good.
Yes. I did not do any of the things I said I was gonna do this month in terms of reading. Surprise, surprise. But part of that I blame on being sick because I had to use Kindle Unlimited because I was like, "I'm not gonna hold a physical book while I'm sick and just cough into it. That sounds awful." At least my, iPad I can clean afterwards.
That's fair. I'll give you that
So,
one.
there's 2 books I definitely read because I just had them on Kindle Unlimited and was like, "This is easy." So,
But that's still at least 4 from your physical TBR. So you're like mostly tracking.
not really, but it's okay.
Okay.
It's fine.
Exposing yourself.
It was like, did I have a path? Yes. Did I follow it? No. On brand. I mean, I'm never going to. We just know that.
Yeah.
So, I know in February, I did end up actually just finishing The Protector Guild where it had, the first 4 books. I know I said I was gonna read it in between books, but obviously there were cliffhangers, and then I was like, "Well, now I wanna know what happens next."
I
So,
think I would have been more surprised if you had stuck to reading it in between.
I know, I know. But they got longer. You know how in the beginning I was like, "Oh, these are so short." No. They were pretty lengthy by the end. So, the first one well, actually the 5th, but it's the first one I read in March. This one, they actually venture into hell to save one of their, teammates. Love hell.
Love how a little good jaunt.
Yes. And then, but this one, aside from, them being in hell, which was fun, this one was a book where they had a lot of, loss of trust and, she didn't know who she should be listening to, the main character, she was just like, "Okay, I thought that these people were telling me everything, but, no one's telling me the full truth." So, obviously, she in that in the book, I was like, maybe I'll take a break," but then it ended on a cliffhanger, and I was like, "Do, to do, I guess I'm reading 6." So, obviously, I went right into that one, and that one was I'm trying to remember. So, Fashion by Flames, I need to go into my, notes. Oh, okay, so they go back to the guilds.
I love anything with fashion in the title.
Okay, the whole thing is, though, I don't know why it has that. It had nothing to do well, I guess she's fashioned by it, but
Oh, okay, never mind.
but, there's, 0 fashion in this whole entire book, I'm so sorry. They're in part of a guild, mostly wearing, leggings and killing supernatural thing.
Fine. Okay.
She is, the least fashionable person probably.
I forget that fashion is a verb because, like, who says that?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
that's fine.
Fashioned, ed. Um, but in this one, they go back to the guild, and the thing about that is, them going into hell they weren't supposed to do, no one knew about it. So this whole entire thing, they're trying to, hide the fact that she has, these powers now that were brought up while she was in hell. So, the rest of her team's, trying to hide this. They're also trying to be like, "Oh, no, that nothing happened. We just got lost, we were
Yeah.
captured by the enemy and came back," kinda thing. But this was when they actually started having, spicy moments. The rest of the books, I would say it was more, plot-based and a lot of,
Mhm.
angsty, "Oh, I like you, but why do I like you?" and all of that stupid stuff, so
We can't be together.
yeah, yeah. So, that book was, I'd say in terms of, like, overall plot and everything that was happening, a lot of fun. But the ending of this one was devastating for me. Like, I was so sad at the end. I didn't think what was gonna happen happened. Like, I was just like, "There's no way. Something else is gonna change this. That's not what really happened, but it was real." And so, I didn't really want to go into the next book after this, so I did take a little bit of a break and read, like, a really random book in between because I was like, after that happened, I was like, "I don't wanna read how everyone's
Yeah,
gonna
like, you
feel
don't
after this," and, like,
yeah.
I couldn't. So, I took a break and read a book that is really different from, like, all the books that I have been reading. It's called A Map for Wrecked Girls.
Hmm,
It's by Jessica Taylor, and it's a contemporary YA, so it wasn't like a
yeah, like
it's not a heavy read, but, like, these girls have some issues. Like, there's sisters that were, like, used to be best friends, and then but this whole entire story is after, like, something horrible happened, and it ruined their friendship, and they're stuck on an island with a boy. Yeah, and it's only
what?
told Yeah, and it's only told from the perspective of the one sister.
I thought you were gonna say from, like, the boy, and I was about to be like,
No,
"Hold the phone."
which that would have been actually
Crazy.
really interesting. Him being like, "Who the fuck are these 2 girls?"
And
Um,
suddenly these girls just appeared.
but throughout the whole entire book, they're, like, kind of leading to what their conflict was to see why they're, like, at the point they are while they're on this island, like, why they're not getting along, why she's, like, fighting so hard to get her sister back, and it's actually kinda, like, devastating. It feels like such teenage shit that would happen, like, not to every teenager, but it's like that conflict that girls have of, like, "I love my sister, but, like, she gets this attention from boys, and, like, I don't get that," and it was, like, that kind of thing that ruined their friendship. So, like, the sister who isn't the perspective we're hearing, she is a little bit more, like, out there with her sexuality, like, everyone knows that she's pretty, she knows she's pretty. The other sister's obviously pretty, but doesn't, like,
Right.
throw herself out there. Um, and so, obviously, the conflicts are always around these, like, boys that I'm like, "These boys don't even matter. They're not even, like."
You will never think of them again in your life.
But that's also from me being now an adult woman. If I was a teenage girl, I would have ate this shit up, like, fully
Yes.
been like, "Yeah, I understand her pain. I am Emma."
All you have at that age is the drama in your life because which,
Yeah.
like, looking back, I was like, "This is such a thriving point in my life," because the drama is so dumb, like, looking back on it. At the time, it would, like, rock your world, but you had nothing else. You had school, you had homework, probably an after-school activity of some sort, but, like, you didn't have bills, you didn't have taxes. Like,
Yeah.
if you were lucky, you didn't even have, like, a part-time job. Like, you literally were just, like, alive, and,
I
like,
swear
what a
sometimes you,
time.
like, made drama just to be like, "What would happen? I
Yes.
don't know." And that's definitely what this was, but it obviously, like, blew up big and was
Yeah.
awful. It was like these sisters had an argument, and the other sister, like, it was her breaking point, and then she did something that was awful. So, yeah, I'm not gonna give it away, but
No, but, like,
so this whole entire time
interesting.
they're stuck on an island, like, these sisters aren't talking. This boy's like, "Girls, we need to, like, survive. We have to, like, build things. We need to find this." He falls in love with, like, Emma right away. Um, and so there's, like, continues to be this, like, conflict with the sisters that has to do with, like, a boy. And,
How
like,
did they
this
get to the island?
okay. How they get to this island is their their parents had, like, recently been divorced, so their mom had to bring them on this work trip, and the sister who has, like, all the, like, body positivity kind of was, like, looking at Emma because she was, like, looking at this one boy, and she's like, "You should go up and talk to him." And they end up going on this boat with these boys, and the other sister is, like, flirting with them or whatever. Their boat explodes. Yeah. And one of the boys immediately dies and is just, like, lost in the ocean. And so these 3, like, somehow get to the island, and they, of course, are like, "Okay," a couple of days, they're thinking, like, "Someone's gonna come and rescue us," and the girls are like, "No one even knows we're here." Like, they didn't tell their mom they were going with these boys. So, they, like, eventually realize they're gonna have to, like, figure shit out and start taking it for real of, like, survival. So, a lot of it is they're still, like, playing these games on the island with each other, but doing what they need to survive kinda thing. So, it was interesting. But overall, I mean, really it was all about, like, love, betrayal, a lot of self-discovery. They're teenagers, so obviously they're figuring their own lives out, and it was an interesting book. I
That
kinda felt
definitely
bad for
sounds
Alex, even though I, like, feel like he did just fine. Like, he fell in love with Emma, and they, like, had to go separate ways. They, like, actually blamed it all on him when they were found, so he got, like, arrested. Yeah. So at the end of this book, like, these sisters, they're, like, brought back to their parents are, like, telling them they can't talk to him, and Emma's like, "He didn't do anything," like, but yeah, because he was, like, associated with the cousin who was into a lot of, like, bad things.
yeah,
So, that was why that's
crazy.
why the boat exploded is because some people within, like, it was like a drug type of thing, like, put it on the boat so that it would explode. Yeah. Wild. 'Cause, like, this is not where I thought this book was going.
No, that's, like, so much to unpack.
Yeah. So, it never left me I never was, like, bored,
Yes.
but I was also like, "God, this is so teenage angst that they're, like, on this island and still thinking this way." Like, I would be like, "This is what we need to do, like, what are we doing right now?"
Now today I'm gonna learn how to make a fire.
Yeah, I was like, "We're either figuring it out today or I'm dying." Like, those are
Yeah,
our options. So, it's just interesting reading YA as an adult. You're like, "I would have ate this up," but now I'm just like, "Girls, let's figure it out. You're on an island. You have no one else." Um, so then after that lovely read away from trauma, because that was not traumatic at all, I decided to go back to the Protector Guilds, and I read Dark Before Dawn. And this one, obviously, it's the main character dealing with a loss. So it's a lot more like grief based and the people being there around her and helping her get out of it. But they did a really good job with it. Like, I thought that's when I felt like all of the characters that are attached to her had a lot of development, even with like their relationships with each other, of how to be there for her. So I actually really liked it more than I thought I would because I was like, this is gonna be so sad. But even the way they like helped her get out of it, I was like, okay. And then of course, this book also had like one of the spiciest themes with the most people at one time. So.
of course.
So it was like all of them basically. Like three
Okay.
males and her, maybe four at one point. I don't know. And then while I was sick in the end of this month, as you can tell by my voice, um, I read the final book, which was The World Undone. This was when I was probably at my most chaotic, though, in my brain of like, I was only up because I couldn't sleep because I couldn't breathe. So, like, as I was reading it, I know I enjoyed the book, but also how many details I remember of it is not that much. And I feel so bad, but it's, like, obviously everything, like, wraps up and everything comes
Yeah,
together, and everything that happened in it, but because it was, like, in between sleeping, because I could only sleep for, like, an hour or 2, and then I'd, like, cough, wake myself up, I would, like, I felt like everything was a fever dream. I'd, like, wake up and be like, "Did I just dream that, or was that in the book I read?" So I don't know if I can give this a actual star rating because of how bad I was at this point, but I'm glad I did read this book when I was at that state because I already knew the world. I already knew everything that was happening. We were just wrapping it up. There's a lot of really sad things that happen because, of course, this is when they're in, like, the midst of war. You're gonna lose people that you, like, started getting attached to, and you're like, "No, I really liked them." So, on top of me just being in a weird fever dream state, I'm just, like, losing characters left and right, and, um, you get a little bit more, like, um different perspectives throughout this book. Obviously, they're at the peak of their bonds, so they're all really close, and I thought the ending and how they brought it together was really, really cute too. So, they brought in some ties where you're like, "Oh, I'm glad they brought that back." They didn't need
Yeah.
to, but it was cute. And then the last book that I read was just a random, Carrie Lake one. She had the Anathema duology, which I read the first one.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, it was just a standalone of hers, and it's called The Isle of Sin and Shadows,
Hmm.
and it's a dual POV through a male and female character, but, it's a dark, gothic romance mystery thriller. Like, it's it was everything, and I actually realized it was perfect for me to have this, like, mystery thriller piece of it because then I was paying more attention to that than the romance, which they actually do focus a lot more on the actual mystery and figuring out what's happening than they do the romance for, like, at least the first half of the book. Um, and the 2 main characters, just for, like, background of how everything starts. Celeste, it's she had to leave, like, it's takes place in, like, a Louisiana-esque type of place, but it has, like, an extra isle on the side that's not real. So, Celeste, it had, like, this traumatic childhood experience where there was this, like, huge mass murder that, like, happened, and so she's taken out of that picture, is brought up to, like, Michigan, taken care of by this man because her father and mother and everyone had died except for her, she was a small child. And so she has this, like, haunting past, and through that, she also still has, like, a lot of trauma, she sees, like, things. So she doesn't really know sometimes what's her, like, reality and what's not.
Yeah.
Um, so you have her, and then at the beginning of this book, the man who's taking care of her dies from cancer, and pretty much at this point, she's like, "I'm an adult, and I need to go back and figure out what my story was." So she goes back to figure this out in Louisiana, where the other point of view is Theory, who is like this broody hitman who's kind of like top dog of the town, but mostly because he's laundering money and helping this like larger essence, like this man who's in charge of everything. Not because he really wants to, but because he has to at this point, like where he's at in his life. And,
Like, he's just, like, in too deep at this
yeah,
point.
like,
Yeah.
I mean, he's definitely a hitman. Like, don't get me wrong, this book was very dark. I will say there's a lot of triggers because there is, like, a lot of cult things that happen in this, so just know, like, the details of what are happening to people. Obviously, a lot of women are taken advantage of, like yeah, like, it's dark. Think like, think of, like, any kind of, like, darker mystery movie that you've watched where there's just, like, those essence of I even think of, like, Seven and where it's, like, all the different sins and, like, how
Yeah.
everything's, like, very gruesome. So there is a lot of that in it. So if that is something like, if you don't like something that's kind of a horror movie almost, like, it's like a horror movie mixed with a dark gothic romance, honestly, because there were some moments I was like, "This is messed up." Like, this is
Yeah.
but also cults can be messed up. Like, the things that were happening, I was like, "Oh, this is awful."
Yeah.
So clearly they're both tied up in this whole entire story. You find out how their, like, lives are kind of twined together, and the part that was kept me going with the whole entire story was actually the fact that, like, usually with things that are like a mystery or thriller, I'm usually like, "Oh, this person's gonna do like this person's gonna do that," but there are actually things where I was like, "Oh, I did not see that coming." So, um, it was a good one for me to read after I was out of my fever dream, thank God, because that
Yeah.
would have really messed up my brain if I was
Yeah.
reading this when I was, like, really, really sick, but I read this in, like, a day just because I couldn't sleep, so, but yes, I'm trying to think if there's anything else, like, big to call out. I would just say, like, if you don't like anything horror, if you don't want anything, like, a lot of people die in this. It's not it's
Oh,
yeah, yeah. Um, and they don't really they don't go into, like, detail of all of them, but some of them, it's like
it's
the
like pretty
you know, think, like,
graphic.
if you were, like, a murder mystery, if they found, like, a tape recording and you're, like, seeing that on a screen of, like, what happened, it's that type of stuff, so it's like, ooh, but it was done in a way that, um, like, knowing the worlds that, like, Carrie Lake builds, it was definitely in that space. It was just much more focused on horror, and then, of
Yeah.
course, the romance part of it comes in, like, more the end of the book, so I actually really liked it, but that's because I also really like, murder mystery type of stuff, so but if I did not have those warnings in the front, I don't know, might have
Yeah.
felt different. And then I'm, like, I barely started this, but so I won't go into detail, but I'm currently reading The Rose Bargain, with 2 friends because they were like, "Can we read it all together and then have wine?" And I'm like, "Sure." Hopefully
I
I
know I saw that and I was like,
can.
"Rude."
I mean, you can definitely read this with us. You'll take one day, and I definitely need more time, so, but the one thing I was gonna tell you, because they were like, "Oh, you should definitely tell Kirsten," and I was like, "I just got sick and forgot to tell you, so I'm sorry." But it's going to be a duology. So this book just came out, so you're gonna be waiting a while for the 2nd book.
That's fine when you tell me before I read it. Where I get mad at you is when you're like, "Here's a book. There's no more." And then I read it and it ends on a
Like,
cliffhanger.
"Ta-da, there's actually gonna be 4," and I
Yeah,
didn't
and then I'm
even know
like,
it.
"Wait."
I was like, "I
And then
bought it
you're
because
like,
it was
"Oh, I've
cute."
actually not read it yet."
It's like, "Sorry, I bought it because it was cute."
Yeah, that's when I like
No, this one, I actually didn't even know it was. I looked it up because it's like, I was like, "Yeah, sure, I'll read it with you guys," and then I was like, "Damn it, what did I just get myself into?" Luckily, it's just a duology. I was
yeah,
like, if it was
super
a
good.
series that was like, "Oh, there's gonna be 5 in the series," I would be like, "Girls, I can't." Like, no. But duology, I can do.
That's digestible.
Apparently, it takes place in a reimagined 1840s England, but it's with a fairy queen. But it's a lot darker than that. That's all I know so far because 'cause I've only read the then, which was, like, 2 pages.
That is a good segue into Babel, honestly, which
Oh,
also takes place in, like, 1830s England,
okay.
but, like, Oxford.
Very nice.
So, we read it for work book club, and only, like, 4 of us read it.
It was, like, also segue of books that Kaylee owns that she hasn't read.
Yeah, yeah. Um Which I had meant to read on my trip, and then I obviously went a very different direction, but, Babel was really good. There were some mixed reviews by a couple of people that, like, the middle of it felt a little long, which I can understand if you're not, like, a nerd, but unfortunately, I love diction and etymology and all things vocabulary, so I was obsessed with that because it's historical fiction. So, what I'm assuming, because I did not, like, fully deep dive, because I was like, "I cannot rabbit hole." I'm assuming the parts that were slightly more historically correct were the, tensions between, like, England and, like, the sovereignty, um, and, like, they were, like, racist, but pretending like they weren't, and China.
Probably.
100%. They, like,
I was
for
like,
sure. Yeah.
yeah, that makes sense.
So they were trying to, like, I think essentially, like, take these territories for themselves, so it was, like, and obviously China was like, "Mm, no." Um, and, like, opium was a thing, which I know that part is that was, like, a whole situation, like, through many periods. But the part that was clearly fiction was the fact that Oxford had, these different colleges, but one of them was about silver working. So, like, all of England and, like, the world is fueled on, like, basically magic silver. So, like, you'd have these silver bars and it powered, like, your lights. It made trains go faster. It made luggage lighter. It made warships, like, stronger. Like, it did so much of this stuff, and the English were obviously hoarding it. But to make the silver work, you had to have, like, the Latin word of what you wanted, like the root. And then you
Oh.
had to have its match pair is what they called it, but in a different language. And then you would speak them together, and that's when, like, it would do whatever
Okay,
it is you're doing.
why does, like, the geeky part of me, like, love that fact that they're like, "You have to have these 2 things together to make this happen." I'm like, "I like that. That's
I was
clever."
upset because it talked a lot about the duality of, like, the roots of words and
Okay.
how language, like, depending on which root you have or what language it's in, like, the definition, like, I was nerding out so
I was gonna say that also is so important. I think so often we don't talk about the root of anything anymore. It's all this, like, gibberish or brain rot now that we, like, hear where I was like, "Do you even know why you're
Yeah.
saying that?"
So it was really fascinating, and it just showed, like, the power of language because so, like, Oxford was really coveting these, like, more foreign languages because, like, they were like, Latin's becoming so common, it's, like, losing its power, and same with French and German. So they were trying to bring in all of these, like, very low, like, poverty, like, less than poverty children from, like, China, Thailand, India, because these languages weren't well known, so it gave them more power in the silver. So it was just, like, very interesting too, because then they were like, "We're also losing a lot of languages as people are, like, dying out, not retaining them," or, like, as more people were converting to speaking, like, English or French, like, it was just very interesting, like, all of that, but then, like, that aside, the plot was, like, really insane. It went from, like, 0 to 100, like, most of the book is kind of, like, build up, and you're just really getting into, like, this story with this little faction, like, their little class of people was, like, only 4 people. So you're, like, learning about their routine and their relationships with each other, and they have 3 years of schooling and, like, all of this stuff. You just get so ingrained that, like, I felt like I was in school with them. And it's
You're like,
very
"I think I took the class and I'm ready to ace it."
I was also stressed we weren't gonna pass year 2, so I was nervous. Um, and then it all really came to a head because again, it was kinda like the have and have not of like the silver and like, why doesn't everybody have silver? Like, why aren't we like sharing this with the world if like blah blah blah. So the end of it like totally like took me by storm, caught me by surprise. Like it was insane. I was mind blown. Um it was so good, but it is definitely not, I think, everyone's cup of tea, like, I'm honestly surprised that I've seen it on Book Talk as much as I have, like, now that I've read it. There's, like, no romance, like, there's no like, it's historical fiction, so there's no, like, princes and fae and, like, whatever, and it is very, like, found family, which I think you would appreciate because, again, it's like they kind of become, like, their little pod because like, they're just all each other has when they're at school because like, they're living at school. most of them were taken from their families because that's the whole point, like, so it was very good. I really liked that one. Um, I started the month reading Let Me Love You by Kelsey Ray, which was the hockey romance
Oh, yeah.
series. It's funny because that was, like, the lightest book I read this month, and then everything else was light. I did feel slightly bamboozled by this book because well, by, like, some reviews of the book because they were like, "Oh my god, this was the best of the 5." And I was like, "What a, like, bold statement," because like, the first one for sure was really good.
What a bold statement.
Well, but I was like, "Okay, this one is in theory from the guy's point of view the whole time." I was like, "Amazing. I love a male POV when you know he's such a simp for the girl and, like, whatever." False. The whole thing was like 8 POVs from every single fucking person's point of view. So they were like 4 storylines, and I hated it because I was like, "I definitely don't care about 4 of you."
Yeah, you're like, "These are too many people, and I don't care about any of you."
Yeah, I was like, "I didn't read your books because I really don't care. Like, I'm glad you're fine, but, like" so I would, like, skip those chapters or, like, literally skim, less than skim, get, like, the super high points and move on. So, like, that was kind of annoying. And I wouldn't say even, like, the main male's POV was that great, like, the whole thing was,
Oh.
like, he, was, like an ex came forward from, like, a previous scandal, basically saying, like, "You have a 2-year-old son." So the whole thing is,
Surprise!
like, "Is it my kid? Is it not my kid? Like, what do I do?" Like, he tried to not tell his, like, girlfriend about
Oh,
it. It was
dumb.
so stupid.
It's
So
like, either way, they're gonna find out even if it doesn't end up being your kid, like, you have to say something.
So, whoever said that was the best of the 5, jail. Straight to jail.
Do not
And
pass go. Do not
do
collect
not collect
$200.
$200. So, I'm glad I started the month with that book because we only went up from there. The next book that I read was Winter Garden, so a literal 180 pivot.
Yeah, that's very different. I haven't even read it, and I know that's different, but
Yes. Also, I believe it would could be I would call it historical fiction, like, slightly more in the fiction, but, like, it does talk about like, it is about, like, Stalingrad, Russia.
okay.
Yeah. So it's a Kristen Hanna book. It was so lovely. She's just such a good storyteller.
I love
But
her books.
this was one of her, like, earlier ones, like, the copyright was, like, 2010.
Oh,
I know. So I was curious since I've only read The Nightingale, which I think was one of her later books, was I was like wondering if I'd be able to tell by her writing style or anything, and I wouldn't have known
yeah.
from it. Like she is just such a gifted author and storyteller. And this book is about like this family that the dad yes. The dad passes away. He was kind of like the glue that held the family together because the mom is pretty, like she's Russian. So she's, like, super standoffish from her daughters, like, their entire childhood through adulthood, and but he was, like, the bridge. Like, he kind of was, like, again, like, the glue holding it all together. So,
Yeah.
he passes away on his deathbed. He's like, "Girls, like, you have to, like,
Stay
get your
together.
mom to tell you, like, the whole story because they were, when they were kids, they were like, "Mom would always tell us these, like, fairy tales,"
Oh,
and she stopped at one point, and so the whole book is about them, like, trying to get her to tell them the full story because the dad was like, "You have to hear the full story," and so it starts as, like, a fairy tale, and then it shifts into, like, something else, and it just was such a good book about, like, the growth of each of the characters themselves, just their own self-work, because the older sister was, like, uber type A and, like, because of obviously things that happened in her childhood with her mom that really shaped how, like, she was a mom and how she treated
Right.
relationships and everything. And then, like, the younger sister had, like, she was so, like, free will, and she was, like, a Nat Geo photographer. Not really Nat Geo, but, um, like a journalist photographer. So it just, like, the way they were shaped by their childhood was so different, and so there was, like, them kind of refiguring out their relationship, obviously their relationship with the mom, and then just how they treated, like, romantic relationships. So there was a ton of just self-growth and, like, growth with them together, and then, like, learning of the story and, like, understanding why the mom, like, was the way she was, and then there was this, like, giant plot twist at the end that I was like, "Holy shit. Did not see this coming." So it was so good. I read most of it at the Von Trapp Brewery, and then I started getting teary-eyed, and I was like, "Gotta go."
Honestly, even hearing you talking about the story, not knowing any of the twists that are happening, it just sounds, like, poetic.
It was. Even the story within the story was just so good. Like, she's such a vivid writer.
I love her writing.
I could envision the story, I could envision the story within the story just so perfectly. Was so good, and I was so happy with how it ended and resolved.
Oh,
I cried a little. Back at the inn, I was at least.
you're like, "For the record."
That's why I left the brewery. I was like, "I cannot have a breakdown in the brewery because I was like, "I don't know if this is gonna be, like, a couple, like, cutesy tears or if it's gonna be, like, SJM, like, ugly cry tears," or, like I mean, I ended up doing that with the Nightingale too, so I was like, "I gotta be in, like, a space that's safe."
Oh my god, I'm sorry, I was just thinking of the time after we both read Crescent City 3, and then you were like I called you, and you're, like, rolling your face.
My
And you're like
emotional support tissue.
just like, "Kaylee, have you finished?" I'm like, "Obviously not." You're like, "I'm so unhinged."
I s
Okay, I'm sorry, very off track, but I was just like, "Oh my god, the roller, like, got me." Like
It's fine. That's, like, my new standard. I'm kind of like, "Is it SJM level cry?" Because that happened after Kingdom of Ash too, I had to put, like, ice on my
oh,
eyes.
I cry about Kingdom of Ash every day. One of
Yeah.
my friends, she's doing, like, a once a week asking us questions, and this week it was like, "What's a fictional death that you'll never forget about?" And it could be from, like, TV or books, and I'm like, "Girl, do you have time?" But
Where do I start?
obviously ones in Kingdom of Ash were on there, so
Yeah. No, Winter Garden was not SJM level cry. I don't know that I even cried as much with that as, like, The Nightingale, but it, like, it did hit you, like, in the feels at the end, but,
yeah.
like, feel good, not
I was
like
gonna say, it hits you some way anytime you read her books, like,
yeah,
you're crying either for any amount of emotions, so
yeah. But it was fun to read it, like, in Vermont with the snow, like,
yeah, it was
felt it.
perfect for that.
That's why I took it. And then
And then
well, okay, let me back up. I also started Becoming, and I am, like, now halfway, but I read it, I think I started it during tea time when I first got on my trip, and then I, like, pivoted, obviously. So I took 3 books with me. Well, I had 3 books. The day before my trip, I decided that wasn't enough for a 4-day trip. So then I went and bought the first 2 books in the Plated Prisoner series by Raven Kennedy, Guild, and Glint, because I was like, Winter Garden, Becoming, Babel, and these 2 will surely be enough to, like, hold me over. I, like, flew through Winter Garden because I was, like, emotionally kind of, like, wrecked at the end of it. I was like, "I don't think I can, like, start Babel." So I broke my rule because I had started the trip saying, like, "Okay, you can't read Guild and Glint until the end of the trip because most likely you're gonna want to immediately go into the 3rd book." Broke that rule, flew through those 2 books. My inn had a bookstore on site, which I didn't go to until Wednesday when I
that's
was like
dangerous. That's so dangerous.
well, it was very small, so, like,
Okay.
it really only could hold so much. To the point where when I first it was so cute. It was so, so cute, though. It was called, please hold, I have a
Yes,
photo.
please say the name because
Mm, mm,
from what you
mm.
showed me, it looked adorable.
Bear Pond Books.
Okay.
It was so cute. So I first walked in and there was, like, the ground floor one, and then, like, the second level was only, like, 4 stairs up, but I don't really know how to, like,
Yeah, it's okay.
classify those separately. So, like, level 1, um, had a ton of just, like, artwork and cards from, like, local artists, just, like,
Cute.
smaller artists. So, like, that was cool.
Yeah,
It had a ton of just, like, Vermont-y things, like books
yeah.
and coloring books and whatever. And then they did have a couple, like, shelves or, like, whatever, of, like, books that take place in Vermont, which were a ton of just, like, holiday rom-coms. So I was like, "Well, that's not really, like, the time right now." So I, like, was like, "I'm not gonna buy one of those." Then they had books written by Vermont authors, a couple of whom were, like, employees at the bookstore, which was cool.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And then they had a whole shelf of, like, Vermont lore, which I was like, "Who knew Vermont had lore?" But, like, good for you. And then they had, obviously, like, 2 whole, like, shelves of Trap family
Yeah,
things, both
obviously.
kind of, like, fiction and not. Um, and then I realized there was, like, stairs up to then, like, genre, so I was like, "Oh, like, I'll just see what they have." And it literally was basically, like, shelves along the perimeter and then one in the middle, like, that was it. That's why I was like, "It's not that dangerous because it only had so many, and, like, there weren't that many books on each shelf too, so it was very, like, but when I walked up there, because I was like, "Maybe." The first thing I saw was an end cap that was, like, "Popular books," and I saw a ton of, like, SJM, like, Fourth Wing, so I was like, "What are the odds they have Raven Kennedy?" And sure enough, they had the whole series. So, I bought the 3rd book and proceeded to read the whole thing.
Yeah,
Um,
as one does,
yeah,
or as you do.
just me. Wait, maybe I bought 3 and
I
I
thought you
bought 3
bought
and
2 of
4.
them.
Yeah, I was like, "Nope, I definitely bought 2."
When you
I was
texted me, I
like,
was pretty sure you said you bought 2 because I was like I I don't remember exactly what I said, but it was for sure 2 books.
because I was just trying to do the math. I was like, I read 1 in a day, but then I kept reading again, like, the next day. So I was like, I for sure bought 2. So I bought the
Yeah.
next 2 books, which were 700 pages each. So, I then read those and then was forced to wait 24 hours to then buy the next
You
2
yeah,
books.
because you read those in, like, 2 days, right? Those 2 books
Yeah.
in 2 days.
I yeah, I read all 4 in, like, 3 days because I
Yeah.
read, yeah, because on the trip alone, I read 4.5 books because I read
You read
the
5 and a
first,
half, right? Oh,
oh,
no,
yeah,
4
it was,
'cause I remember, like, at the end of it, you text me and you go, "Now it's 5 and a half.
yeah, I think, like, yeah. It
Don't worry, I have the receipts."
was kind of like a fugue state while I read that series because I was just, like, cracking through those bad boys like a deluge. And what was so annoying was, like, minus the bear pond store because there were only, like, 3 genres, um, like, they're not in the same section at every Barnes& and Noble, so, like, when I went to buy the
Oh,
first 2, I had to ask, um, the person to, like, help me find it, and it was in romance, and I was like, "Okay." Then I went and bought the 5th one, and that was in the fantasy section at a different Barnes& and Noble.
I feel like fantasy makes the most sense, right? Like,
Yeah.
just based off of what I've heard of the books?
Yeah, which I'll dive into in a second.
Okay.
And then I went back to get Goldfinch back at the first one, so then I had to go back to romance. And I was like, 1, why are we not just, like, putting the books in the same spot
Yeah.
at each store? Like, right, wrong,
Why
or
don't they
otherwise,
have a sheet that's like, "This book goes here."
romance. But then also, why are we, like, labeling genres? Because I would not list these as romance at all. No,
Especially
I'll
if you're, like, a true, like, romancy girl and you went into this, you'd be like, "This is fantasy."
well, yeah, because it was in the middle of a bunch of, like, sports romances. I was like, "These are not the same."
What?
They was next to all the L. Kennedy books because it's by author last name. I was like, if
Oh.
you blindly, like, picked up a Raven Kennedy book, so you were like, "Oh, like, romance, it's next to L. Kennedy, sure," like,
Yeah, I would
no.
actually be upset if I was a like, strictly a romance girl reader.
And then all of her books have, like, trigger warnings at the front, so
Yeah.
it, like, not anyways,
And thinking of, like, the size of them, most romance books are not 700 pages.
4 6-book series where you have to read the ones before to know what's
Right.
happening.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, like, you have to finish all 6 to know how it ends. Like, at no point did I finish any of these books and was like, "You know what? I'm good where I am now."
Right.
So, all that to say, only because of the last book do I give this series 4 stars. If the
Oh,
last Yeah, if the last book wasn't what it was, I would give it a 3.5.
okay.
But I will preface that I think it's because I am at the point in life and romantasy that I'm at right now. If I was younger, if I had read this, like, after ACOTAR, I think I would have loved it way more because it kind of feels more of, like, a gateway romantasy series almost.
Right, like one of those that you, like, want to, like, start the world building in kind of way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. So, there were some points where I did feel like it did get a little overdrawn, a little, like, repetitive, and kind of, like, backtracking a couple things, which again is just because of, like, where I'm at now. But it was a very unique spin on, like, the King Midas story,
Oh,
which
okay.
I knew going into it, I didn't expect the, like, spin on it to be what it was, and that's really all.
Okay.
I'm, like, trying to think if it would be, like, a spoiler. I feel like it's not, honestly. He doesn't actually have the power.
Okay.
It's Oren, who's, like, the main female, but she helps him, like, bamboozle everybody into thinking he is the power because in this kingdom of Aurea, or, like, the world is Aurea, there's 7 kingdoms. The rulers are rulers because they have magic.
Got it.
So, like, if you don't have power, like, you can't be a ruler. So, the queen of the 6th kingdom, Melina, was born with no magic, so she had to, like, marry somebody with magic who then became, like, king of her kingdom.
Interesting.
Yes. And then, of course, Oren okay, I will say this did kind of scratch my brain. Um, she does eventually have, like, a good arc, but at first, Oren is a little more like, "Woe is me, like, the man is taking care of me, I'm good, I'm not here to ask questions, be a thought leader," like
Yeah.
so it was kind of nice to watch someone truly, like, grow those skills and start to, like, have the wool pulled away, like, from her eyes, start to, like, process and, like, develop critical thinking, and, like, she had a super fucked up childhood, so I don't blame her for, like, where she was at, and she kind of, like, comes to that realization too, like, the reason she lets him, like, treat her the way he did is because she was, like, so broken and unsafe and, like, all the stuff as a kid that, like,
Right.
whatever. There were some plot twists with him where I was like, "Oh, shit," like,
Oh,
um, and then there's the other guy, Slade slash Commander Rip. Um,
wait, what kind of rip?
so that is actually part of the story that I cannot tell you.
Oh, okay.
Because that is actually a very big plot point because Oren spends, like, a good few books being like, "Why the fuck are they calling you Rip? Like,
Yeah.
that is not your real name." Um, but
Okay.
he got his whole crew of, like, generals, and their little squad was hysterical together, like, they give each other shit, like, they're very much found family.
So I'll
He
love
had
that.
Yeah, he had a fucked up childhood too, like,
Does
dad
anyone
issues,
nod in these books?
and yeah. And then, like,
Like, could you
obviously,
imagine a hero that was like, "My life in the beginning was just so easy."
I had loving parents that were together their whole life, and my siblings and I get along.
No one
Let's
in my
here for the
family's
ride.
died from, like, a
Yeah.
traumatic experience, like, we're all fine.
My, like, childhood animal pet is still with me
I'm
today.
so healthy, but, like, I still wanna go and, like, figure out all of these details and try to save the world and leave my family.
Yeah, that would be crazy. Um, so on top of just, like, the Orin Midas, Orin Slade debacles, there's this underlying, like, Faye versus Orion rift because, like, the lore of the worlds is that, like, way back before this started, there used to be a bridge that connected the Fae world, Anwin, to Aurea,
Okay.
and somehow it broke for whatever reason because there started to be, like, strife between the 2, I don't know, it broke,
Which
which I'm
that's pretty common. There's a
yeah.
lot of breaking of bridges with no background of why that happened.
You do learn. I
Okay.
just, I can't remember. There was a lot that happened in the last 2 books, I'm not gonna lie.
You are totally fine. I'm gonna eventually read them, so you
Yeah.
don't need to know every detail.
So there's kind of, like, that storyline and how, like, that plays out. Yeah.
Are
I
you just trying to be careful of what you say?
I was trying to decide, like, what potentially counts as a spoiler and, like, what doesn't, but, like, I would say if I said anything more about that, it would be a spoiler because I was surprised.
Okay.
Um, and then the first the first 2 all the books have multiple POVs, but it's, like, pretty contained in the first few to just, like, Orin. Midas gets, like, 1 per book-ish, which was fine, and then
Okay.
Queen Melina is actually pretty she's somewhat frequent, like, she has, like, a handful of chapters each book, and, like, her character arc is what honestly made this series for me because
Okay.
she went through so many ups and downs of, like, truly learning what it means to be a good ruler, a good person, like, all of this stuff, like, she was so good. I loved reading her chapters. Um, what really bothered me the most was I was fine with, like, the multiple POVs because it was pretty consistent with who had one and how frequent they had it through, like, the entire series. Book 5, all of a sudden, there was, like, a new character POV, but I didn't hate it because it didn't happen that often, it would be, like, 1 chapter.
Okay.
You get to book 6, suddenly everyone has their own fucking POV, and it is, like, all the time. And I get that it's because there's, like, so much happening, like, so
In
many people
separate
are
spots and
dispersed, but I was just like, it was so jarring to me, and I was like, "I don't care about this storyline here, like, I care about this one here, and, like,
yeah.
when are we getting back to get like" so that irked me quite a lot.
I thought
Uh,
honestly that you were gonna say there was a prophecy.
nope, no prophecies. Thank
When you're
fucking
like
God.
when you were like, "Do you wanna know what irked me?" I'm like, "Yeah, it must have been a prophecy."
No, there was not. She did have, like, poems at the very end that, like, weren't part of the story, but, like, they were interesting to just kind of read once you finished, like, but it was not a prophecy, like, it literally had nothing to do with, like,
Were
the
they
character.
interesting because they felt like they tied to it? Like, she definitely read those and thought of this whole concept probably because of it?
I
Or
couldn't
like
tell if she wrote the poems or
oh,
not,
okay,
but they were, like, I still enjoyed them,
okay.
either way. There was something else that bothered me too, but I cannot for the life of me remember what it was. Oh, well, I don't know if this is really what I was gonna say, but there was, like, a plot device that was like, "Oh, we're gonna just, like, wipe someone's memory."
Mm.
pretty late in, and I was like, okay."
I mean,
It was
sometimes you just gotta wipe a memory.
it was giving manacled,
Oh,
kind of. It was fine. It didn't last very long, so that I kind of, like, hall passed. So,
it's just
wow.
Men in Black, you just go zoop, and then they're done.
Um, but yeah, it was really good. Like, I would still tell someone to read it. Again, I would probably just caution, like, more,
If you've read a
human.
lot of
Yeah.
yeah,
If you've read, like, more romantasy and you've kind of graduated from, like, the ACOTARs of the world, like, I would say you probably would have some pain points with this at certain points. But
yeah,
on the whole, like, I'm glad I read it. I think it's good. I think especially for either, like, younger readers, like, still, like, 21 plus, but, like,
yeah.
south of 30, or if you're, like, trying to get into romantasy, like, it was really good.
Or if
And
you
it
just read ACOTAR and are back into reading, you
yeah,
can read this after.
it is very spicy,
Oh, like
which
every book is?
yes.
Or just, like, overall? Okay.
Overall, like, there's a lot of, like, sex, in general, like, even if it's just, like, in the background, because there's, women called saddles,
Oh, what an
which
interesting name, but okay.
they're basically like, if you're a saddle, you're, like, a prostitute, essentially,
Sure.
and then if you're a royal saddle, that's, like, really elite, because then you're, like, a prostitute for, like, a king or queen.
Yeah, it means you probably have better living situations,
Yes, you live in a castle. So Midas had, like, 6 saddles.
Jesus.
So, like, he would, like, do things with them, and Orm would have to watch, like, whatever. So there's, like, a lot of sex. It's not, like, overwhelming, like, I never felt like it detracted from anything, like, suddenly there was a sex scene, and I was like, "Oh god, like, here we go again."
Yeah,
So, it was done in the way that, like, we've discussed that I enjoy, where it's kind of like, it's not necessarily advancing the plot, but it just, like, fits in the moment, and,
right.
okay, like, this is like, it's fine.
Like, you don't all of a sudden think in your head, like, "Why is this happening right now?"
Yeah, like, they're not,
There
like, in the
have been
middle of a
moments I've
war.
yeah. Like, there's been moments I've been reading and all of a sudden I'm like, "Was this the time?" Like, are you really that horny that you, like, couldn't wait a little bit?
There was a carriage scene, and I was, like,
Okay,
reading it, and I
well,
was like, if this does not happen, like, I will be so upset." But then, like, it was so good. I was like, "Excellent use
I
for
mean, if I
men."
was in a carriage, I would probably do the same, so it's fine.
Yeah, but they are, like, explicit, which is why I say it's, like, spicy, because 'cause they're, like, very explicit sex scenes, so it's not, like,
Okay,
PG-13, it's, like, pretty R.
thank God.
A couple times, I was actually even like, "Jesus."
Okay, well, that's saying a lot.
More again for, like, the explicitness than anything else, I was just like, "Wow,
Yeah,
okay."
yeah.
But overall, it was good. Like, I'm glad I read it, can, like, cross it off my list. I've got all 6.
I have them all.
Yeah. I have them all. I
Great.
did sign up for the Barnes& and Noble rewards program by the end.
As you should. You already oh, because okay,
Apple. I usually buy
you're
Apple,
right.
but, like, you know what I mean? But I
Yeah,
had told myself, like,
but after buying that series, I think you pretty much can get yourself a free book.
well, no, because the first 2, I didn't sign
Oh,
up for it, and then the next 2 I bought at Bear Pond.
okay. You're
And
right.
then 5, I think, is when I signed up, because I was finally like, "Okay, I've hit my if you visit Barnes& and Noble 3 times or more in the next whatever months, you need to sign up for this program." So
Yeah,
then I did.
that's fair. And you should because it's not like it expires. It's just like you buy another
Right.
book and then it's like, "Oh, okay."
Well, and, like, I obviously have to buy the House of Devil series, because that is, like, very soon on my list, but, like, those aren't on Apple, so I'm gonna have to go buy the books. So,
I as I think the next one of that series comes out in, like, July, and so
creeping.
that's probably when I will be buying those because them so much. But
So, And then like I said, Halfway Through Becoming by Michelle Obama, which is very
I
much
was gonna say, but also you can just, like, take your time with that. Becoming's a really good book, though. Like,
it
I
is
really
so
enjoyed
good.
yeah. I really
I
enjoyed
really she's a great author, writer, like, I just love her, and her story is so it's, like, right here.
I know, I was gonna say it's also, like, was really easy to it's a really easy read because I
Yes.
enjoy how she wrote it, or, like, how it's being presented, basically. So
And fun, like, hearing about her and Barack, like, meeting in the early
yeah,
stages of their relationship, kind of, like, like, how we knew them to be, and
right.
then just hearing her kind of analyze the kind of person he is, like,
Yeah,
on a personal level, like, it makes sense now seeing and knowing, like, what we know of him from just his, like, public appearances, where I'm like, "Oh, like, this makes sense now that he, like, was the president, like, was the way he was," but, like, if I had never read that, like, I wouldn't know
yeah,
a lot of this, and then, like, she has a lot of struggles that I think are really impactful, like, I know she called out, like, she had a miscarriage and, like,
right,
especially back when she actually had it, like, that was so secretive, like, women did not talk about it at all, and she was like,
right.
"I felt like such a failure, only come to find out, like, it's honestly more common than not to have a miscarriage," like,
Yeah.
so many women do, which
It's
I
insane, like, how we, like, talk about those things, honestly. I think about that just knowing obviously, like, at our age, so many people are going through, like, trying to have kids. It's much more common than people think. I'm just glad we're at a point now where people feel like they can go to people they care about and, like, bring that up. But, like,
yeah,
that's, like, very recent. That's, like, not
it
that long.
is. 'Cause I have a friend, when she was getting pregnant, like, pre-COVID, like, she had had a miscarriage, and it, like, rocked her world, as it does, I think, to everyone,
Yeah.
regardless, and I had heard she finally told me she had had one, and I panicked because in my mind, it's like, "Oh my gosh, that's such a bad thing," like, that's, like,
Yeah.
really bad medically, and she was like, "Actually, the doctors, like, don't get concerned unless you have 3 or more, and then they start to throw red flags."
Oh, wow.
That's how, like, common they are. Also, hers was so, so early. I do think it is different if you miscarry, like, a 3rd term
Yes.
child or something, but the, like, 1st term miscarriages, I think, are so insanely common that, like, to medical communities, like, there's a threshold before they even start to be like, "This is we should be concerned."
Right. Like, the most common, like, time that is going to happen, like, they're not gonna worry about. Like, most people have that
But
happen.
again, it's not talked about, so it was just like, I never realized that until that, and I was like,
I
"Oh."
mean, until you just told me that, I actually did not know that doctors don't even really think about it till at least 3.
I mean, I'm sure there was still but, when I was
I'm sure
like,
they
"Are"
check things, but, like
yeah, but when I asked her like, "Oh my gosh, like, was everything fine? Like, did your doctor like da da da?" She was just like, "The doctors don't have a concern about, like, me getting pregnant or having a
yeah,
successful child unless I miscarry, like, 2 more times."
yeah,
I was like, "Oh." So, it was good that she talked about that, like, that was good, and then I think she also just has very interesting takes on, like, the Black community, more specific to Chicago and Illinois, because that's where
yeah,
she, like, grew up, but it was just, like, interesting to hear kind of, like, her take because she owns it too. She's like, "I didn't quite have the stereotypical, like, experience,"
right,
and even just how that is, like, perceived in the world,
yep,
and same with Barack, but
right,
then with their personal circumstances and how, like, they went to couples therapy because she was like, "We are, like, not like,
yep,
this is becoming a problem, but I wanna, like, fix it."
yep,
So it's very good. I'm, like, officially halfway. I do wanna finish it just so it stops taking up, like, brain space where I'm like, "I have to finish this book," like, it's on the list, like,
yeah.
I'm not the best at reading multiple books at once.
I wish I could do it, but, like, honestly, if I go to another book, all of a sudden I go back to the first book and I'm like, "Am I mi" and maybe it's, like, also a difference of, like, how different those books are, but it really I still just, like, forget things if I don't keep reading it.
I definitely, like I've only done it a couple times now with this one, but Becoming is the one that I've, like, stopgapped because I can kind of just go back to it, and I'm like,
Yeah,
"Okay, I know, like, what her life has been, like, it really is no impact on, like, what I have
right.
to finish reading."
Like, this
And
is the type of book you could do it for the most, but I wouldn't
yeah.
wanna do it, like, too many times where, like, it's been so long I don't have the whole story.
Well, then it's just harder for me to motivate myself to finish it too. So then it's like, well, it's been a year,
Yeah,
like, who cares? And I like to, like,
right.
feel like, "Oh, I finished this, like, check it
Yeah,
off," like,
me too, which is also a problem, which is why as soon as you were like, "Should I read Babel?" or I was like, "Well, here we go. You're gonna finish this series in a week."
yeah, less than, so,
Yeah, yeah, but it's okay.
yeah. It was a
We
special week. I
listen and
think
we don't judge.
it was a special week because literally the point of that week was to do nothing except, like, read or doom scroll. That's a wrap for today. Make sure to follow us on social media at Girls Gone Reading Podcast to keep the bookish combos going.
Until next time, happy reading.